right, so for next time, we're going to be moving on to talking about the slave trade and imperialism. So we're going back to Volume D. This is the reading for next time. It is also on the syllabus. It's in Georgia View. And your timeline submission should be something to do with the slave trade in the British Empire between 1770 and 1835, right? Okay, so do you have any questions about anything before we start talking about Doris Lessing?
Don't we have timeline submission to do today?
No, it's next time.
Oh.
I think, yeah, I think that, like, I think you might be, oh no, yeah, this is actually, the way the syllabus is written out, yeah, it is due next, they're usually due Wednesdays anyway. I think that you are mixing up what's the homework and what's actually, what we're actually doing today. So the homework is always what we're doing for next time.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll say I did them if they were due today.
Yeah. Well, we'll hold on to them for next time.
Yeah, because I did modern or contemporary era of limited society.
Okay.
I don't even know if I did the right time.
Okay. Well, that actually would have been appropriate for Wednesday, for this past Wednesday when you weren't here. So actually, so what have you got?
I don't know if they're the right timeline because I couldn't remember the dates you told us for that. But January 23rd, 1849, Elizabeth Blackwell, first woman to graduate from medical school and be doctor in the U.S.
Okay.
October 16, 1916, I can't read my own handwriting.
Uh-huh.
Margaret Sanger opens the first birth control clinic in the U.S.
Okay.
And then on May 15th, 1869, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton found the National Women's Suffrage Association, which coordinated the national suffrage movement.
Okay. So one small problem with all three of those. Which class is this?
Britlet.
And where did all of those take place?
In America.
Yeah.
Dang
yeah.
it.
That's the thing, right? Those are all
My bad.
related to the women's movement in America, right? So yeah. So just remember for next time, right, that you're focusing on stuff that is specifically to do with the British role in the slave trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not with the U.S.
Right.
Okay. So let's just go ahead and get into the Doris Lessing then. What'd you think of this? How'd it go for you?
It has like a certain creep factor to it.
Okay.
And also, what is of them keep mentioning intelligence, intellectual.
Uh-huh.
Like, I already read it the first time, but I had to go back and reread it because I was like, what?
Uh-huh.
Like, okay, it drove me crazy when they said, what page was it on? I can't remember. I think it was back here. She said that they put the whole thing behind him. I would kill him. I would kill him if he cheated on me.
Uh-huh.
That drove me crazy.
Yeah, well, and I think if we put this into context, then this probably all makes a lot more sense. Like we got this is all occurring in a particular kind of socioeconomic context and a particular historical context, and we've got a very modern, as of 1963, educated couple.
1940s, 1950s.
Yeah. The story's published in 1963, so it might actually help if we think a little bit back to last time. And the three feminist texts that we looked at last Wednesday. So we had the Mina Loy Feminist Manifesto, which was written in 1914 but not published until the early 80s. We have the two Virginia Woolf texts, right? A Room of One's Own is published in 1929, and Professions for Women both of which originated as public lectures, is published in 1942. So this is about a generation after Woolf, right? So it's a little more than 30 years after A Room of One's Own. And Woolf stressed in her work a couple of things, right? One, that it is impossible for anyone to be a writer, right, without having the material conditions of their life satisfied, right? So, conditions for being a writer, right, as per Woolf, right, your material needs have to be met, and you also require privacy. Right, if you've got little kids running around pulling on your legs all day, if you have to, manage the kitchen and the household, right? Essentially what she's trying to do is explain in A Room of One's Own various reasons why, historically speaking, there have been so few women writers. And a lot of it has to do with these particular issues, right? The just lack of privacy, the lack of having any space or time to oneself, right? Hence the title, A Room of One's Own. And by 1963, right, so one of the things that Woolf does in Professions for Women, right, is she literally, or she describes her literal strangling, right, of the angel in the house. Now, do we remember who or what the angel in the house was?
Angel in the house was the one who did all the cooking and cleaning, and they were loyal to their husband, and they somehow make sure their husband was well taken care of.
Yeah, so it's the Victorian ideal. Victorian, not Victorial. Of middle-class womanhood, right? And I think one thing that we sometimes get confused about is that if you're a middle-class Victorian, even if you're a woman, you don't actually do the cooking and the cleaning and the taking care of the children yourself. You have a servant to manage that.
You see to it too.
Yeah, but you're the one who's supposed to see to it that it gets done, right? So the angel in the house manages the household. And kind of makes the home, into a kind of moral center for her more worldly husband. Right? Who has to go out there and make his way in the sinful workaday world. Right? To give him something good and warm and nice to come home to. Right? So, given that this is a 19th century idea, and that there's been so much feminist agitation and so much feminist writing since the invention of this idea of the angel in the house, one would think by 1963 this idea would be obsolete, right? But if we look at the life of Susan Rollins as spelled out in this story, is it? Yeah, what does her typical day look like? Particularly before she starts renting the room at the hotel.
She takes care of the kids herself.
Uh-huh.
The only one cleaning is the woman that comes in daily.
Yeah, they hire this, they have a, what's called a charwoman, right? Do you know what a charwoman is?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so a charwoman is a servant who doesn't live in the house, right? So she comes in to handle, to handle the cooking and the cleaning and so on and so forth. I think what is it? Mrs. Parks is their charwoman.
The only thing she does is takes care of the kids. I didn't mention anything about if she does the shopping, but Mrs. Parks does the cooking and the cleaning part.
Yeah. So yeah, she does go off and do the shopping herself, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she spends most of her time,
Gardening.
yeah, out in the garden or with the kids, and pretty much all of it in their big suburban house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the trajectory of her early life here and how this kind of leads to the failure in intelligence that we get in the first sentence. Right, page 901, right? This is a story, I suppose, about a failure in intelligence. The Rawlings marriage was grounded in intelligence. They were older when they married than most of their married friends, in their well-seasoned late 20s. Both had had a number of affairs, sweet rather than bitter, and when they fell in love, for they did fall in love, had known each other for some time. They joked that they had saved each other for the real thing. That they had waited so long, but not too long, for this real thing, was to them a proof of their sensible discrimination. A good many of their friends had married young, and now, they felt, probably regretted lost opportunities, while others, still unmarried, seemed to them arid, self-doubting, and likely to make desperate or romantic marriages. So, what about the Rawlings marriage in this first paragraph here is intelligent? Right? What suggests here intelligence, or making an intelligent choice?
They married late.
Okay, yeah, they married relatively late, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means what? Why does that strike the narrator as intelligent?
They were able to live their lives separately, but then they got married.
Yeah.
They were able to do more adventuring in their younger years, and then they were ready to settle down.
Exactly, right? So yeah, that means that they're more experienced in the world when they got married, right? You know, so the idea being that they have gotten a lot of things out of their system before settling down and getting married, right?
Or so they think.
Or so they think, exactly, yeah. And you know, this is the first time also we see the word sensible used in relation to the two of them in their relationship, right? And this is something that becomes a key word when talking about them as a couple throughout the story, right? Not only they, but others felt they were well matched. Their friends' delight was an additional proof of their happiness. They had played the same roles, male and female, in this group or set, if such a wide, loosely connected, constantly changing constellation of people could be called a set. They had both become, by virtue of their moderation, their humor, and their abstinence from painful experience, people to whom others came for advice. They could be, and were, relied on. It was one of those cases of a man and a woman linking themselves whom no one else had ever thought of linking, probably because of their similarities. But then everyone exclaimed, "Of course, how right! How was it we never thought of it before?" And so they married amid general rejoicing, and because of their foresight and their sense for what was probable, nothing was a surprise to them. So what's going on here? What do we see about Matthew and Susan's personalities in the first paragraph I just read here? What's the important point about their personalities?
They were a team.
Yeah, in what way? Like how?
They had the same personalities.
Yeah, they're very similar to each other, right? So how might that actually be problematic if two people who are very similar to one another marry?
Well, they say opposites attract, so.
Sure. But then let's think about like where the cliche comes from. It's like, why would opposites attract, say, more than people who are very similar to each other? If you marry someone who's very similar to you, then what do you risk?
Fun. Never stepping outside of boundaries.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so this is actually something that's mentioned in the short paragraph that follows, right? There are no surprises. Right? Nothing unexpected happens, right? But also, and I think maybe another thing that's problematic becomes clear when they decide on their living situations, right? Both before they married had had pleasant flats, but they felt it unwise to base a marriage on either flat because it might seem like a submission of personality on the part of the one whose flat it was not, right? So if they choose one person's apartment to live in, then that might feel like the other person is submitting to the personality of the person whose apartment they are living in, right? But this whole similarity thing, the similarity problem, already implies a certain level of personality bleed, right? Where does one person end and the other begin? Right? If they're too much alike, it becomes harder to differentiate between yourself and the other person, right? They moved into a new flat in South Kensington on the clear understanding that when their marriage had settled down, a process they knew would not take long and was in fact more a humorous concession to popular wisdom than what was due to themselves, they would buy a house and start a family. And this is what happened. They lived in their charming flat for 2 years, giving parties and going to them, being a popular young married couple, and then Susan became pregnant, she gave up her job, and they bought a house in Richmond. It was typical of this couple that they had a son first, then a daughter, then twins, son and daughter. Everything right, appropriate, and what everyone would wish for, if they could choose. But people did feel these two had chosen. This balanced and sensible family was no more than what was due to them because of their infallible sense for choosing right. Right? So they're sensible and balanced, and they, spend their 2 years living together in the city as a young married couple, having fun, right? Socially connected. And then what happens?
They get a family.
Yeah, then they have a family. And what else do they do?
They move.
Yeah, they move from the city where they're both socially connected, right? Out to a big house in the suburbs. And, you do that in part, and I think the narrative suggests this as well, people do this in part because it's the expected trajectory, right? Because it's social convention. that for an educated middle-class family with the money to do so, once you decide to start your family, you don't do it in the city, you do it in a big house in the burbs.
Most people don't do it because a flat is too small for 6 people.
Sure, that's also an issue, right? But then again, for people, for whom cost is an issue, right? They don't like. I don't know. Have you ever read A Raisin in the Sun or seen the play?
No, but I want to.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the issue there is that one of the characters becomes pregnant, and the others are debating what to do about it because there's no room in the apartment for another person, right? There's no place to put a baby.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, space isn't an issue for the Rawlings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything they've done has followed the expected, totally conventional trajectory for a young, educated, upper middle class couple. Right? White collar jobs, suburban house. Susan quits her job to stay home with the kids. Matthew keeps his job in the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they lived with their 4 children in their gardened house in Richmond, and they were happy. They had everything they had wanted and had planned for. And yet, first indication here that all is not as it should be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? On paper here, everybody should be satisfied, right? On paper, the Rawlings are living a life that other people would be envious of. But what's happening to Susan over the course of the story?
She gets bored.
Yeah.
Lonely.
Yeah, she's bored and she's lonely, right? Right, this big house out in the suburbs leaves her pretty much alone with nobody to talk to except the charwoman and the children, right? And then the children, once they start going to school,
She don't know what to do with herself.
yeah, exactly. And their friends say, "Oh, you'll feel better once the children are off your hands," right? But she doesn't. Why do you think she feels so empty in this house and in this life?
Well, she doesn't have a job.
Yeah, no job. Right, she had a promising job, but she gave it up.
Yeah. She has 4 children, and that can be a lot to take care of.
Okay, yeah, 4 kids.
'Cause she said constantly needs attention.
Uh-huh.
Her husband cheated on her.
Yeah, and not just once. And I mean, even just apart from Matthew's lack of fidelity, what else is she seeing him doing every day that she doesn't get to?
Going into the city and being free from the children.
Exactly, yeah. He still has his own life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a life that she and the children have nothing to do with, right? Matthew still has an independent life outside the home, and she does not.
Even when he is home, it's like he's barely there.
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, it's, long commute, right? If we look on page 904, right after his first infidelity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, for it was inevitable that the handsome, blonde, attractive, manly man, Matthew Rawlings, should be at times tempted, oh, what a word, by the attractive girls at parties she could not attend because of the 4 children. And I think the key word there isn't actually even, Matthew being tempted by pretty girls. I think the key word there is she could not attend.
What she doesn't know will kill her.
Yeah. But at the same time, it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the not knowing so much as the not being able to have any kind of outlet like this herself, right?
I mean, he told her one time, but
Mm-hmm.
she had doubts, like, he shouldn't have told me. At the same time, it'd been stupid for him not to tell me.
Uh-huh.
So she's like,
Yeah, but intelligent, sensible, balanced people don't get upset about things like this, right? Because, on balance, they have this lovely, beautiful life together.
sure.
But that's part of the point, right? Is that like being intelligent, right, doesn't leave you room to have feelings, right? Intelligent people don't get jealous, right? Because jealousy is, so primitive and uncivilized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intelligent people don't get upset about little infidelities. Because after all, what matters more is what they've built together, right? And these are the kinds of things that she tells herself to get over it, right? And I still ultimately think that it's not even Matthew's infidelity that gets her upset or that causes her problems. I think that the problems here are more with a lack of personal identity. That she is the one who has kind of given up everything and has become a mid-20th century angel in the house. Because wherever she goes, whatever she does, she's responsible for what other people are doing, right? She can't escape from her family or even from the charwoman, right? Even when she's given a room in the house as her own private space, all right, page 909, right? Right, because she lost her temper with the children during their last holiday. Nevertheless, as a result of this conversation with her husband, there was a new regime next holidays. The spare room at the top of the house now had a cardboard sign saying, "Private, do not disturb," on it. The sign had been drawn in colored chalks by the children, after a discussion between the parents in which it was decided this was psychologically the right thing, right? This is what experts would advise you to do, so this is what we shall do. The family and Mrs. Parks knew this was Mother's room and that she was entitled to her privacy. Many serious conversations took place between Matthew and the children about not taking Mother for granted. Susan overheard the first between Father and Harry, the older boy, and was surprised at her irritation over it. Surely she could have a room somewhere in that big house and retire into it without such a fuss being made, without it being so solemnly discussed. Why couldn't she simply have announced, "I'm going to fit out the little top room for myself, and when I'm in it, I'm not to be disturbed for anything short of fire"? Just that and finished, instead of long, earnest discussions. When she heard Harry and Matthew explaining it to the twins with Mrs. Parks coming in, yes, well, the family sometimes gets on top of a woman, she had to go right away to the bottom of the garden until the devils of exasperation had finished their dance in her blood. Why is the discussion of her private room so irritating to her?
Because she thinks she should have the right to go away without being disturbed and not having to have a long, dragged-out conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, plus, is she involved in any of these conversations?
No.
It's always, it's all between Matthew
And the
and the children, right? Or Matthew and Mrs. Parks, or Mrs. Parks and the children, or whatever, right? And it's like she's being talked about
Instead of her being.
as an outsider, right?
Yeah.
Instead of her being able to say, look, just when I'm in that room, leave me alone, right? But now there was a room, and she could go there when she liked. She used it seldom. She felt even more caged there than in her bedroom. One day, she had gone up there after a lunch for 10 children she had cooked and served because Mrs. Parks was not there, and had sat alone for a while looking into the garden. She saw the children stream out from the kitchen and stand looking up at the window where she sat behind the curtains. They were all, her children and their friends, discussing Mother's room. A few minutes later, the chase of children in some game came pounding up the stairs, but ended as abruptly as if they had fallen over a ravine, so sudden was the silence. They had remembered she was there, and had gone silent in a great gale of, "Hush, shh, quiet, you'll disturb her." And they went tiptoeing downstairs like criminal conspirators. When she came down to make tea for them, they all apologized. The twins put their arms around her from front and back, making a human cage of loving limbs, and promised it would never occur again. "We forgot, Mummy, we forgot all about it." Like that phrase, human cage of loving limbs, right? What does it remind her of when the twins hug her?
Her life just revolves around the kids.
Yeah.
And nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, she can't even sit up in a room by herself without it being an object of their conversation, right? And then telling all their friends about it. What it amounted to is that Mother's room and her need for privacy had become a valuable lesson in respect for other people's rights. Quite soon, Susan was going up to the room only because it was a lesson. It was a pity to drop. Then she took sewing up there, and the children and Mrs. Parks came in and out, and it had become another family room. So this private room for her ultimately isn't for her, right? It becomes about teaching the children a lesson. And because of that, it fails, right? She can't build her own identity in this room because she can't forget the things and the people she's responsible for there, right? They're still more important than she is, right?
I was about to say, who's watching them while she's up there?
Well, I mean, I guess Mrs. Parks, right?
Hope so.
Yeah. But then, when she takes her husband suggests that she take the walking tour, right?
Mm-hmm.
She goes and takes the walking tour of Wales. It's the same problem, right? She can't be left alone. Right, that Mrs. Parks insists on calling for instructions. The children are constantly calling to say that they love her, right? And so these are things that don't sound evil or invasive, right? But they also don't solve Susan's basic problem, right? That what she actually needs, what she actually desires, is a life of her own. The problem is that these other bits of her life are constantly intruding and preventing that from developing.
She feels trapped.
Exactly, yeah. Hence the human cage of loving limbs, right? So the basic thing that she's trying to do is develop a sense of self again, right? But everything in her life is conspiring to prevent that from happening. Because she's always responsible for other people. Other people can't get on without her.
I mean, there's a possibility she could just walk away. I mean, people have done that, but
Yeah,
I guess she just feels the responsibility we're bearing down on her.
yeah,
And yet she's like, I want this, but they need me.
yeah. And I think, there's, it's hard to break, this old Victorian ideology, right? It's like, yeah, Virginia Woolf killed the angel in the house, but did she? It's, I mean, we still have this kind of culturally pervasive idea, one, that people who are married should have children, and for a lot of couples, right, that the wife should stay home and basically sacrifice everything for the good of her kids, right? That everything that you're doing should be for your children, for someone else other than you. And that's the same ideology that Susan Rawlings is running up against here, right? That everything she does, like, that even when they mean well and aren't trying to get in her way, Matthew and the children are, and even the servant, right, who's supposed to be there to help her, who's supposed to be there to lighten the load of things she has to do, are constantly getting in the way. And Matthew's even getting in the way from a distance, right? He's in the city most of the time.
He's doing what she wants to do.
Yeah. And indeed, that is kind of what she starts doing. She starts going into the city first 3 days a week and then 5 days a week, and just renting a room in a shitty hotel, right? A dingy, nasty room. And what does she do in that room?
Doesn't she basically do nothing?
Yeah. She just sits there for a couple hours and does absolutely nothing, right? So given all of this, like, why do we think she's doing, why is she doing this?
It's kind of crazy though, because she first wanted to do nothing.
Uh-huh.
And then when she had kids, she was used to doing something.
Right.
And after the kids went to school, she was like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Uh-huh.
She's like, she didn't know what to do. She was not used to it.
Yeah.
And then she goes there and she does nothing.
Uh-huh.
I mean, she wants time to think. She wants time to think about what it is she actually wants, like what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just...
What can she do to make this life that she's living better?
Yeah, just time to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without anyone needing her, without anyone calling her, without anyone even knowing where she is.
She just wants time to think about somebody else. To think about herself other than somebody else for once.
Exactly, yeah. Like, to be someone other than somebody's wife or somebody's mother or somebody's employer, right?
She wants that independency.
Yeah. And yeah, she gives a false name, right? When she goes to this place, she calls herself Mrs. Jones, right? And why does she choose this place specifically? Why does she come to this particularly shitty, dingy, disreputable hotel? What happens when she tries the same thing in a more respectable hotel?
People notice. People wouldn't expect you to go to a middle-class woman to go to a crappy hotel.
Yeah, okay, on the one hand, this is unexpected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, when she goes to the respectable hotel, when she goes to Miss Townsend's hotel, right? Miss Townsend won't leave her alone. She's trying to be nice. She comes up and brings her tea, right, and sits down for a chat. But the chat ends up being about Miss Townsend, right? And she doesn't want to talk about Miss Townsend or to talk to or about anyone.
She wants to be let alone.
She wants, yeah, exactly. And this is a place, bless you, where she can be assured of more or less total privacy, in part because it's the kind of hotel where people rent rooms by the hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then once they're done,
Goodbye.
yeah. So yeah, it's like the kind of place where people conduct extramarital affairs. But, you know, for her, that's actually, at least initially, right, the best kind of security, because it means nobody's going to ask any questions, right?
Plus, people who are doing the deal want to be let them know, and they typically do leave them alone.
Exactly, yeah. There's generally a kind of code amongst people who are engaged in dodgy behavior, right? And it's
None
like,
of my business.
exactly, yeah. I won't look you in the eye, you won't look me in the eye, and we'll just go our separate ways, right? Yeah, it's none of my business why you're here, and it's none of your business why I'm here. Yeah. So yeah, a place like Fred's Hotel is perfect for this kind of situation, right?
For all they know, she could be going in there smoking some stuff she shouldn't be.
Sure, and in fact, you know, she does at one point, you know, find residue of a powder on the chest of drawers, right? So somebody was probably doing coke in there.
She just goes in there and does.
Yeah. And she tells Fred when to come and fetch her, right? If Fred is indeed his name, she doesn't even know or care, right? And he does that and attempts no further intimacy, right? That's good. Right, now then, what is it that destroys this little private space that she's built up? Right, she always insists on the same room, right? It's got to be room 19 each time, always the same one. Why can't this last?
I think it's because she goes back to there's a certain responsibility that I gotta have, and this isn't my reality. Maybe.
Well, she's basically taken care of all of her responsibilities at home, right? She's hired an au pair to take care of the children, right? This German girl, Sophie Traub. And she's noticed that Matthew, you know, is eyeing this girl as well. If we look on page 917, right, just as things, you know, things seem to be going beautifully, right? And soon she made a new arrangement with Fred and with Sophie. It was for 5 days a week. As for the money, £5, she simply asked Matthew for it. She saw that she was not even frightened he might ask what for. He would give it to her. She knew that. And it was terrifying and could be so, for this close couple, these partners, had once known the destination of every shilling they must spend. He agreed to give her £5 a week. She asked for just so much, not a penny more. He sounded indifferent about it. It was as if he were paying her, she thought, paying her off. Yes, that was it. Terror came back for a moment when she understood this, but she stilled it. Things had gone too far for that. Now, every week on Sunday nights, he gave her £5, turning away from her before their eyes could meet on the transaction. As for Sophie Traub, she was to be somewhere in or near the house until 6 at night, after which she was free. She was not to cook or to clean, she was simply to be there. So she gardened or sewed and asked friends in, being a person who was bound to have a lot of friends. If the children were sick, she nursed them. If the teachers telephoned, she answered them sensibly. For the 5 daytimes in the school week, she was altogether the mistress of the house. Now, on page 918, then, right, because Matthew's been asking her questions at home. Right, next day she asked Fred, "Have inquiries been made for me?" He hesitated and she said, "I've been coming here a year now. I've made no trouble and you've been paid every day. I have a right to be told." As a matter of fact, Mrs. Jones, a man did come asking. A man from a detective agency? Well, he could have been, couldn't he? I was asking you. Well, what did you tell him? I told him Mrs. Jones came by every weekday from 10 until 5 or 6 and stayed in number 19 by herself. Describing me? Well, Mrs. Jones, I had no alternative. Put yourself in my place. By rights, I should deduct what that man gave you for the information. He raised shocked eyes. She was not the sort of person to make jokes like this. Then he chose to laugh. A pinkish wet slit appeared across his white crinkled face. His eyes positively begged her to laugh, otherwise he might lose some money. She remained grave, looking at him. He stopped laughing and said, "You want to go up now?" Returning to the familiarity, the comradeship of the country where no questions are asked, on which, and he knew it, she depended completely. She went up to sit in her wicker chair, but it was not the same. Her husband had searched her out. The world had searched her out. The pressures were on her. She was here with his connivance. He might walk in at any moment here into room 19. She imagined the report from the detective agency, a woman calling herself Mrs. Jones, fitting the description of your wife, etc., 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 stays alone all day in room 19. She insists on this room, waits for it if it is engaged. As far as the proprietor knows, she receives no visitors there, male or female. A report something on these lines Matthew must have received. Well, of course he was right. Things couldn't go on like this. He had put an end to it all simply by sending the detective after her. So what spoiled her enjoyment of the room?
Well, he was wondering where she is.
Yeah, that now Matthew knows about this, right? So if she continues to go to the room and he knows about it, then what does she, by extension, have from him?
Permission?
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? This was something she was doing without his knowledge or permission, solely for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And now that she has his permission to do it, right? It makes her feel like he's doing her a favor, right? She's no longer independently deciding this is the thing I'm going to do 5 days a week. It's now something he lets her do. So it's back into this Victorian mindset of, husband lets wifey have a little money and go off and enjoy herself, right? So so this is destroyed by Matthew's permission. And then by his assumption that she must be having an affair, right? So he tells her about his affair, and she has to make up. She has to make up a lover to satisfy his curiosity, right? And to make him feel less bad about himself, right? She makes up a publisher named Michael Plant. The whole time thinking about the ridiculousness of it all, right? And resenting him, not for having an affair himself, but for forcing her to concoct a stupid story to explain what she does 5 days a week, right? Invading her privacy, right? That she is carefully constructed in this room, in this crappy hotel over the course of a year, right?
That's also another sign that she is the only one who changed. Like, you don't read of her ever having an affair, but you read that in the beginning of the story before they got married, they had their fair share of affairs.
Yeah.
So she's living a lonely, boring life. Like, he gets to go out and have affairs and.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also it's like where would she have where would she even have the opportunity to meet someone to have an affair with, right? Stuck at home with the kids, or then just stuck at home, right? Once the kids are at school. So this suburban neighborhood dream, right? That middle class couples pursue. For Susan ends up being, just a trap that saps her of her own identity, right? And turns her into, against type and against her own will, an angel in the house. She's the angel in the house because she doesn't have anywhere else to go.
It's like a forced identity.
Yeah, it's an imposed identity. Yeah, good. And the other thing that we start seeing happening as well, as Matthew gets more and more worried, right? Because he sees her not behaving as sensible and balanced as they always had, right? Susan starts becoming irrational. Right? And she's irrational, or asks for irrational things, right? Because human beings are irrational, right? Feelings are irrational. She can intellectually justify away, things like, his affairs, or, the children intruding on her privacy, things like that, right? But reasoning them away doesn't change the way she actually feels about them, right? It doesn't stop her from feeling angry or annoyed or like she's being caged in, right? So by the end of the story, she's basically set up everything for her own exit, right? She's got Sophie Traub in place to take care of the kids. Mrs. Parks in place to take care of the house, right? And indeed, Sophie, she also sort of expects that Sophie will take care of Matthew's needs as well. And then on page 922, right, she goes back to room 19 for the last time. Right. Number 19 was the same. She saw everything with an acute, narrow, checking glance, the cheap shine of the satin spread, which had been replaced carelessly after the two bodies had finished their convulsions under it, a trace of powder on the glass that topped the chest of drawers, an intense green shade in a fold of the curtain. She stood at the window, looking down, watching people pass and pass and pass, until her mind went dark from the constant movement. Then she sat in the wicker chair, letting herself go slack. But she had to be careful, because she did not want, today, to be surprised by Fred's knock at 5 o'clock. The demons were not here. They had gone forever, because she was buying her freedom from them. She was slipping already into the dark, fructifying dream that seemed to caress her inwardly, like the movement of her blood. But she had to think about Matthew first. Should she write a letter for the coroner? But what should she say? She would like to leave him with the look on his face she had seen this morning, banal, admittedly, but at least confidently healthy. Well, that was impossible. One did not look like that with a wife dead from suicide. But how to leave him believing she was dying because of a man? Because of the fascinating publisher Michael Plant? Oh, how ridiculous, how absurd, how humiliating. But she decided not to trouble about it, simply not to think about the living. If he wanted to believe she had a lover, he would believe it. And he did want to believe it. Even when he had found out there was no publisher in London called Michael Plant, he would think of it. He would think, oh, poor Susan, she was afraid to give me his real name. So, what are her thoughts of here as she is preparing to die?
Should I care about them or no?
Yeah. She still thinks like other people are still intruding on her mind, right? Oh, what will Matthew think? Oh, should I leave him a note? And then, thinking about it, the ways he'll rationalize all of this to make himself feel better, right? So yeah, she's still wrapped up in her thoughts about her husband, not about herself. And what did it matter whether he married Phil Hunt or Sophie? Though it ought to be Sophie, who was already the mother of those children. And what hypocrisy to sit here worrying about the children when she was going to leave them because she had not got the energy to stay. She had about 4 hours. She spent them delightfully, darkly, sweetly, letting herself slide gently, gently to the edge of the river. Then, with hardly a break in her consciousness, she got up, pushed the thin rug against the door, made sure the windows were tight shut, put 2 shillings in the meter, and turned on the gas. For the first time since she had been in the room, she lay on the hard bed that smelled stale, that smelled of sweat and sex. She lay on her back on the green satin cover, but her legs were chilly. She got up, found a blanket folded in the bottom of the chest of drawers, and carefully covered her legs with it. She was quite content lying there, listening to the faint, soft hiss of the gas that poured into the room, into her lungs, into her brain, as she drifted off into that dark river. So, first off, why does it, the last thing that the gas drifts into her brain, do you think? Can we kind of bring that back to the beginning of the story? The last thing that we hear about the gas drifting into is her brain, right? Can we tie that back to something that's said at the beginning of the story? Very beginning.
Maybe the failure in intelligence?
Exactly, yes. This is the failure in intelligence come full circle, right? That, this intelligent, sensible, balanced match ends with Susan's suicide. And why do you think she does this?
Commit suicide?
Yeah.
Because she didn't see a way out. She was stuck.
Uh-huh.
Matthew was trying to find it for it to be her fault,
Uh-huh.
even though he's the one not being loyal and
Yeah. Well, he doesn't even care if she's having an affair. He suggests they double date, right? So, it's like, it's not even that he's upset about it, right?
it's the fact that he's okay with it.
Well, and not only that, but that he even knows about it, right? And forces her to concoct this ridiculous scenario where now she has to figure out how to produce a Michael plant from somewhere, right? That it's become about satisfying Matthew's curiosity rather than about her just being left the hell alone for a few hours every day.
I would have told him off. You know what?
Mm-hmm. But I think that's the other thing here is it seems like choices have been made for Susan for the whole course of her marriage, right? So the word choose pops up in the story a lot, right? That the Rawlings tended to choose right, or they made good choices, things like that. But Susan doesn't actually have a lot of choices, right? She's not the one making the choices. And, whatever we think of the decision, this is at least a choice that she makes herself, right? Maybe the only one she feels she can make for herself. And so, doing so is a kind of final assertion of independence. But even that, I think, is complicated by the fact that she can't do this without making sure everything's okay before she goes, right? There's, that weird scene near the end where she's goes back to her house and is looking in the window and she sees Sophie Trout comforting her daughter, right? And it's as though she's not, it's as though she's a stranger in her own family. All right, so let's leave it there. I'll give you the reading questions for next time, and we'll come back on Wednesday with timeline stuff. I'm afraid that Wednesday doesn't get any cheerier.